CIT 1121, Module 9, Submodule 2, ARP Address Resolution Protocol. One of the most important protocols that you're going to have in IPv4, it is, I like to call it a helper protocol because it is used before you can actually send the data to where you want it to go. And really there's three different things that you're going to see coming up with ARPing. There is sending ARP to a local host. And I know, once again, we didn't spend a ton of time talking about local hosts or what's on the same network. And just know that if something's on the same network, it's called local. And if it's something that, if you're trying to get to something that's on a different network, it's called remote. So localhost ARPing basically says, hey, what's your MAC? What's your MAC address? I got something that I want to send to you. I know your IP address. Tell me what your MAC address is. When we go to a remote host, we can send to what's called a remote host. And we can ARP to a remote host. And the data section of that says, hey, default gateway. I have remote IP traffic. IP, we'll just say IP data. What's your MAC address? The third kind, and those are the two, I mean, you can send information to local hosts. You can send information to remote hosts. That's all the information you're going to send. The other thing we use ARP for is for a unique address check, which is called a gratuitous ARP. Gratuitous ARP, which says, basically, is this your IP? Is this IP you? It's exactly the same as a local host, except for you're using your own IP. Is this IP address you? You're just tricking the other devices on the network to say yes and say, if my IP address is 192.168.1.10, and I send out a gratuitous ARP, and another device responds back and they say they're 192.168.1.10, that means that the other device was on the network first, and due to the rules of TCP/IP, you cannot participate. So gratuitous ARP, one of the first things that you do when your computer gets plugged in, it gets an IP address, first thing it does, gratuitous ARP, sends out a request for its own IP address to make sure that it's unique on the network. So you have those three things. So keep those in mind. The next slide's a pretty good slide, I think, and it just kind of goes through and it uses the little bubbles because, you know, this is how I think about it too. When I think about networking and computers, I think about the computers actually saying stuff to each other like little cartoons. So you can see here, 192.168.1.5/24, you know, this guy, he wants to communicate with 1.7, which is down in the corner. That's H4. So it says, I need to send information to 192.168.1.7, but I only have the IP address. I don't know the MAC address of that device. And here's the thing. The switch doesn't care about the IP addresses. Remember, when we learned about switches, switches have a table called a CAM table. And that CAM table has two columns. One is for the physical interfaces on the device, and the other one is for MAC addresses, right? So there's going to be an interface F0/1, F0/2, F0/3, so on and so forth. And whichever device, if this device is here, that MAC address goes there. If this device is here, that MAC address goes there. If this device is here, that MAC address goes there. And that's how it builds that table. That's how it makes its forwarding decisions. Without knowing the MAC address of where you want to go, you're not going to be able to send stuff where it needs to go. So this is a nice slide, a good example of local traffic being pushed across in an ARP example. We did an OK one in the last video for remote. So if it's local, I'm looking for 192.168.1.7, right? Hey, 192.168.1.7, tell me your MAC address. And 1.7 is going to receive that message, that ARP request, which is a broadcast. So it'll go out to everybody, and only H4 will respond. and it'll respond with its MAC address. It'll give it to H1. H1 will then know the MAC address of where it wants to send it, and it'll go ahead and put that in the frame header, and it'll send it on its way. Now, let's get a little wild here. Here we go. I'm going to use the eraser because I just want to conserve slides. Now, in this case, we don't have a router. We don't have a router, but we need one. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a router right here, and that router is going to send out to the internet. That's going to go out to the internet there. And you can always draw the internet by drawing a cloud or something that looks kind of like a cloud and saying that's the internet. And on this particular router, the IP address on this interface is 192.168.1.1/24. Don't worry about what /24 means right now. Just know that the address is 192.168.1.1. Just know that that's what it is. Now, our device H1 doesn't want to send to 192.168.1.7, wants to send to 5.5.5.5. Now, here's the thing. H1 is going to look at its own IP address with its subnet mask value and say, is this local or remote? Another way to say that. Is this address on my network or is it on a different network? And the answer is it's going to be remote. If that's the case, then I send the same request out, but I don't send the request to 5.5.5.5. I send it to 192.168.1.1. I send it to the default gateway, and I say, hey, default gateway, tell me what your MAC address is, because I got information that's remote, and I get the MAC address of the default gateway, and then I send the traffic, and the router sends it out to where it needs to go. That's the whole thing with ARP. That's the beginning and the end. You got it all on one slide there. Okay, last slide in this section talks about the ARP table, and you can actually view it on a router, and you can also view it on a PC. And we showed it in the last slide, but they did have in the last video. But I wanted to show it here, and you can see here from a router's perspective, which we haven't logged in any routers in a while, but we're going to start logging into them pretty much every class pretty soon. So show IP ARP is how you're going to see your ARPing table on a router. If you're on a PC, it's ARP space -A. And if you need to clear it and then reset it, it's ARP space -D from a command line. Okay? So hopefully that was helpful.